What if your destiny could not be dictated by politics? And what does that teach us about your own spiritual authority? My name is Peter Abundant, aka Dr. Abundant, PhD and ordained minister of metaphysical sciences, which is the study of spirituality. I am also the author of The Enlightened Shadow and Spiritual Not Religious, both available on Amazon and Audible. So, the Dalai Lama just turned 90 years old, and he confirms that he will reincarnate and protect his spiritual lineage. Now, turning 90 is very significant because that basically kind of signifies the beginning of the end. He's pretty frail. He's pretty, weak and fatigued. And he knows, and many of us do, recognize that, okay, he needs a successor. The Dalai Lama, the title of the Dalai Lama is actually a title like the Pope, which is something that is passed on, right, from person to person. In situations like the Catholic Church, a council will decide who becomes the next Pope. Whereas when it comes to these Tibetan monks, which the Dalai Lama is the leader of, he basically decides because apparently the successor is actually the reincarnated version or essence or persona of the previous, right, Dalai Lama. And what I find interesting is that he stated that his institution will be choosing the 15th Dalai Lama, and that it will be potentially a female born outside of China, explicitly bypassing Beijing's influence. Now, why is that? Well, China and the Dalai Lama had been pretty much at odds with one another because the Dalai Lama, ultimately, his message is one of freedom, spiritual freedom, in fact, whereas China is a communist group that really doesn't support the idea of people being and having the ability to essentially do whatever they want, right? Follow whatever, spiritual beliefs, political beliefs that they have. Basically, China functions under a strict, rigid framework, and the Dalai Lama does not support that. And so the Dalai Lama, his monks, and his followers and supporters basically are in a massive amount of people that have great influence. And so China has been trying to gain, right, power over these Tibetan monks and the Dalai Lama's institution or trust. Now, being highly aware of the power that China can have by basically figuring out ways to take over, right, the Tibetan monks and their influence, they have been trying to maneuver certain things to make that happen. One thing I found really interesting is that the Dalai Lama had already previously named a successor to the position of Dalai Lama. But 3 days afterwards, China, or I should say, 3 days afterwards, that boy disappeared. And the natural assumption is China allegedly kidnapped and abducted this boy to prevent him to become the next Dalai Lama. Now, this being said is really why it's so significant as to the Dalai Lama's claims and his declaration of making sure that the 15th Dalai Lama himself reincarnated potentially as a female outside of China is significant because it means that it needs to be done in a way where China can't influence or take over the power structure or the influence of the Tibetan monks and the current Dalai Lama's, positioning and influence. So China is likely to obviously contest, this statement or this naming of the next Dalai Lama by the Dalai Lama himself, the current Dalai Lama's institution Okay. And that's creating a lot of global tension around religious freedom and the nature of spiritual succession. Right. So you have to understand how, though on our spiritual journey, there are times where we are at odds with society or the community that we live in, the culture that we live in, where that culture, that society will try to stop you from fulfilling your purpose, stop you from doing what you know is right and what should be done. And you have to be mindful about that, you know? So, as far as this goes, it's interesting and important for you to recognize that legacy goes beyond the physical. Okay. The Dalai Lama's decision highlights that spiritual legacy, lineage is not tied to the physical body. You may not be somebody who resonates with the idea of reincarnation, but that's what Buddhists believe. They believe that they reincarnate to fulfill their dharma, right? Their purpose, to fulfill, pay, or cultivate, right? Karma, to cleanse karma from past lives, or to basically fulfill a grand purpose of what I call consciousness, right? And so you have to recognize that your spiritual lineage, it's living, it's alive, and it's evolving, right? It's basically evolving consciousness, stepping through time, stepping through lifetimes, So you understand that freedom is consciousness. You recognize by this example and this understanding of what the Dalai Lama is claiming is that declaring the succession outside of the political, control, it speaks a lot to the soul's right to self-determination, right? It reminds us that our personal sovereignty in spiritual choices are important. They're a must. They're, in fact, the only way. When we think that our spiritual sovereignty or our spiritual freedom or power is equal or less than the society we grew up in, the family belief systems, the culture, if we think that that's bigger than our spiritual journey, then that is going to be a prime example or a basis for why certain things are not manifesting for you in life. You have to understand that there is nothing more powerful than you. Now, you may say, well, God is more powerful than me. Well, I say you and God are one. There is no separation between you and the Creator. Therefore, recognizing that, you create whatever reality you desire. Whatever you believe, it is. That's how powerful consciousness is. This is why people can have different belief systems and they can still fall true. You see? So it's important to understand that the inclusivity of the divinity that is within you, the potential that for a female to be the next Dalai Lama reminds us that, divine roles are not gender. They're beyond gender. Okay. Spiritual power transcends all those external beliefs. And so when you think about that in terms of yourself, you may be saying, well, I'm a man, I can't do this, or I'm a woman, I should do this, or vice versa. You have to recognize that you are first a creator. You are first a creator of your reality. Therefore, whatever it is that's pulling you towards it, all right, by way of curiosity, by way of passion, by way of talent, by way of just pure wanting, desiring to do it, is everything. It is more than enough. It is enough for you to actually pursue it without any concern about politics, without concern of religion, right? Without concern of what your family thinks, what your life partner thinks, your spouse thinks, without concern about what your kids thinks. You have to stand against that form of control over you. You see, the conflict in China mirrors our inner battles. And that's the point. Everything in life is a mirror of what's going on within you. And it is a mirror for your greater good. So when the ego or outside forces, right, try to choose who you should be, it's essentially time to assert your authentic self, to take ownership of who you know yourself to truly be. You know, the spirit cannot be politically defined. It cannot be culturally defined. It cannot be racially defined. And so it is above and beyond all of those things. You see, you have to recognize that the essence of the Dalai Lama's statement is basically recognizing that once he leaves his physical form, okay, he can essentially take on any shape and form that he desires, any place he desires. And it is so significant because no matter what shape, what gender, what form, where he is still going to be him. You see what I'm saying? So it doesn't matter your culture, doesn't matter the community, doesn't matter what country you're born in. The reality is you are still you, and that you can never change or escape. So you must continue and be that. Don't hide it. Don't push it away. Don't neglect it. Express it, live it, be it, you know? Understand that your soul legacy must move forward. It will move forward, you know? Recognize your own self-sovereignty, your own agency to be able to do what you want. Why? Because that is what you are supposed to do. We are supposed to do what we desire based on consciousness, based on the purest aspects of self. It's important because that lends itself to your happiness and your fulfillment. You know, this is about personal, spiritual empowerment, right? Trusting your own inner wisdom against any external pressure. You see? Now, when I thought about this, I was kind of like, this is so cool. Now, this is another thing that was interesting about what I've read is him saying that it could possibly be a female. He can possibly be a female, right? Definitely outside of China, someplace where basically that person is free. So it can be United States, it can be, Europe. I think one of the news articles referenced a free world. Okay. But also one of the articles said, actually, he can reincarnate into an adult who's already been living. Now, this is what I like to think about when it comes to the quantum field and quantum mechanics. How time actually means nothing to consciousness, to the spiritual aspects of self. This means that he can reincarnate and his spirit can really jump into you, can jump into me, and take on the role of the Dalai Lama. You may be saying, how's that possible? He's supposed to, what we see in the movies is he's supposed to die. And then immediately the person who's born right after has to be the person, right? Or one of the people who are born right after is probably the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. Well, he's saying that that's not the case. And why isn't that the case? Because when it comes to consciousness, the spirit realm, time is not a thing. Time only applies to the physical body, the physical plane. And so you have to step out of these constraints, right? When you're on a spiritual plane like he is, he's not confined by worried about being born in China or worried about being born a man. He recognizes that, hey, I can be born any gender, at any place, and at any age. Do you realize how deep that is? So, it gets into thinking about the quantum realm and time, and how essentially in any moment we can essentially be whatever it is we desire to be. We can be a whole different person if we decide to, So it's just interesting and crazy to me. And I thought to myself, wow, okay, if he's a woman, I went with my imagination. I was like, what if the next Dalai Lama was a black woman, right? How cool would that be? And the reason why it would be cool is because, one, I'm excited about a female Dalai Lama. I'm excited about a female president one day. I'm excited about women showing up because men, we've had our time. We did enough. Okay. Did we do a good job? We'll see. Let women do their part and contribute, and let's see, and let's take an honest look at, okay, what our roles are, or, maybe if you're into the whole gender war thing, which I think is insignificant and silly, you can see for yourself, right? And I don't really think it's important because ultimately, whoever does a better job actually does it for all of us, all genders, all people, at all places. So I think it's interesting to just imagine, just to play with this idea. Also, what was said is that his institution has detailed information on how to actually find his successor, his reincarnated version, right? His reincarnated self. And I'm like, wow, that's got to be interesting. Apparently the Dalai Lama before him, or at some point, and I forget which Dalai Lama was it, before him had a vision. That's what it was. The Dalai Lama before him had a vision of a house. And in that house was, as a baby, the current Dalai Lama. And that's how he knew that he was the next one. So it happens in different ways. So he was already, maybe, no, I don't think he was already, he had the vision before the current Dalai Lama was actually born. But nonetheless, that's how he had the vision. So now I guess he's at an age and at a point where he knows transitioning is happening. And so maybe he's having these visions and understandings as to what and who and where and at what age he's actually going to incarnate, which is beautiful, right? And he's smart because he knows China's influence. So therefore, he's not saying anything. He's not saying too much as far as China doing what it once did, allegedly, by, him naming a successor and that successor kind of disappearing, So that is interesting. That is something that we need to recognize, because then that also bears the question, like, okay, if he knew that was his successor, if he chose him is there a difference between choosing a successor and recognizing that you're going to be reincarnated into your successor? You know what I mean? Like that's deep. So I'm not sure if there is a difference, or him choosing the successor, that successor disappearing was actually part of him learning, recognizing, and understanding that his successor is actually going to be someone else, perhaps female, and someone out of China. But the point being, your spirituality is not limited to a particular culture, political belief, or any kind of system. Your consciousness is the most powerful, strongest thing that could ever be. So don't even try to confine it. When you try to confine it, guess what? It's still going to come out, but it's going to come out in ways that are unpredictable, that are uncomfortable, okay, that are aggressive, because what's going to happen is it's going to have outbursts, it's going to have triggers. And those outbursts and triggers are just signals. They're letting you know that something isn't in alignment. And your job is to pay attention to that, So I want you to just simply take this lesson and recognize that if the Dalai Lama can understand the significance of his lineage, his legacy, then most certainly you can as well. Thank you so much. Feel free to go to drabundant.com, subscribe to my daily newsletter, and get access to this free ebook, The Power Within. Continue to join me on this journey. Peace and abundance always.